Rene Magritte, the painter who made us question reality. You are looking at a painting. Right in the center of the canvas, there is a pipe. Beneath it, only a single sentence reads, "This is not a pipe." At first, you smile, because your eyes clearly see a pipe. But after a few seconds, an unusual silence begins to settle in your mind. Is it really a pipe? Or is it merely the image of a pipe? That is exactly what Rene Magritte wanted. Not to show you a painting, but to make you question reality itself. In his paintings, the sky drifts into ordinary rooms. Massive rocks or float effortlessly through the air. Faces disappear beneath white cloth. Apples conceal people's identities. Doors seem to open into other worlds, and every object that appears ordinary suddenly transforms into a philosophical question. Magritte was never as flamboyant as Salvador Dali. He never appeared as revolutionary as Pablo Picasso. He never became a tragic legend like Vincent van Gogh. Instead, he did something far quieter and far more dangerous. He challenged one of the strongest habits of the human mind, our tendency to believe whatever we see. Today, traces of his ideas can be found everywhere. In advertising, cinema, photography, graphic design, even the visual language of social media. Because Magritte wasn't simply painting images, he was painting thought itself. But where did these extraordinary ideas come from? What happened during his childhood that would lead him to spend his entire life painting hidden faces, veiled figures, and unsolved mysteries? The answer takes us back to a quiet Belgian town at the end of the 19th century, November 21st, 1898, Lessines, Belgium. Europe was being transformed by the Industrial Revolution. Coal mines, factories, rapidly expanding cities. It was into this changing world that René François Guillain Magritte was born. His father, Léopold Magritte, was a textile merchant. His mother, Regina Bertanchon, was a homemaker. From the outside, they appeared to be an ordinary middle-class family, but behind closed doors, life was far from ordinary. While René was still a young child, his mother began showing severe symptoms of depression. At the time, mental illness was poorly understood. Depression was often dismissed as nothing more than temporary sadness, and those who suffered from it were left with little or no proper treatment. As the years passed, Regina's condition deteriorated. She repeatedly tried to leave home. She attempted to take her own life more than once. Her family constantly watched over her, hoping to keep her safe. Young René grew up surrounded by this heavy atmosphere. At an age when he should have been playing carefree games, he was listening to the silence inside his own home. Perhaps that is why, years later, nothing in his paintings would ever be fully explained, because nothing in his childhood had ever been clear. Everything seemed hidden within the fog. 1912. René Magritte was only 13 years old. One night, his mother disappeared from the house once again. This time, she would never return. After hours of searching, Regina's body was found in the Sambre River. One detail of the tragedy has remained the subject of debate among art historians for more than a century. According to one widely repeated account, when her body was recovered, her nightgown had covered her face. Over time, this story became one of the most frequently cited explanations for Magritte's art. Years later, veiled faces would appear again and again throughout his paintings. Many art historians interpreted them as an unconscious response to his mother's death. But there is something important to remember. Magritte himself never accepted this interpretation. In fact, he was known to dislike questions about the subject. Perhaps there truly was no connection. Or perhaps there was, And even the person who carried that memory could never fully explain it. Because the human mind does not always express its deepest pain through words. Sometimes it speaks through symbols, perhaps the hidden faces in Magritte's paintings were the silent echoes of a memory he could never put into language. After his mother's death, everything changed. His childhood ended overnight. Yet it was during this darkest chapter of his life that he discovered the thing that would shape his future: painting. Magritte had loved drawing since childhood, but after losing his mother, painting became far more than a hobby. It became the only language through which he could express what remained unspoken. His earliest works reflected the influence of Impressionism and Symbolism. He had not yet discovered the distinctive style that would later make him famous. Yet even then, one characteristic began to set him apart. Unlike many artists who focused on depicting beauty, Magritte became fascinated by meaning: a door, a window, an apple, a bowler hat. To him, these were never just ordinary objects. Each one marked the beginning of an idea. This growing curiosity eventually led him to one of Belgium's most prestigious art schools. In 1916, Magritte was admitted to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Brussels. But academic life proved to be very different from what he had imagined. The rigid classical training left him uninspired. Perspective, anatomy, technical discipline, none of these truly excited him. What fascinated him far more existed outside the classroom: the writers, the poets, the philosophers, the endless intellectual conversations taking place around the academy. Magritte spent as much time exploring ideas as he did studying painting itself. It was during these years that he first encountered the philosophy of Plato. Later, he became deeply interested in the ideas of linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. Is the name of an object the same as the object itself? Can a word truly represent reality? Or are all the things we see merely symbols created by the human mind? Years later, these questions would become the foundation of some of the most famous paintings in the history of art. During his years at the Academy, Magritte also reconnected with someone who would change his life in another way: Georgette Berger, whom he had first met during childhood. Their friendship gradually deepened into love. Georgette would become far more than his wife. She would remain his greatest supporter, his model, and his lifelong companion. But Magritte's true transformation had not yet begun, because very soon he would encounter a single painting that would change everything. One extraordinary work of art would alter his understanding of painting forever. And that encounter would transform René Magritte from a talented young artist into one of the greatest visual thinkers in the history of art. The late 1910s. René Magritte had graduated from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Brussels. Yet a growing sense of restlessness remained. He had learned technique. He understood perspective. He had mastered light, shadow, and anatomy. But something still felt incomplete. One question continued to haunt him. Should painting simply depict the world as we see it, or could it reveal what lies beyond what we see? To make a living, Magritte worked as a commercial artist, designing advertising posters, wallpaper patterns, and commercial illustrations. The job did not make him wealthy, but without realizing it, it laid the foundation for his future artistic language. Advertising taught him something invaluable. A single image could influence the human mind within seconds. One ordinary object could speak more powerfully than hundreds of words. It was during this period that the foundations of Magritte's simple, yet deeply unsettling visual language were formed. But the true turning point came in 1922. One painting would change everything. One day, Magritte encountered Giorgio de Chirico's painting, The Song of Love. A silent city square, a classical sculpted head, a giant rubber glove hanging on a wall, a train passing quietly in the distance. At first glance, none of these objects seemed connected, yet together they created an overwhelming feeling of mystery. Years later, Magritte recalled that moment, saying the painting moved him to tears. For the first time, he had seen an artist who was not trying to reproduce reality, but to reveal the mystery hidden beneath it. Until then, painting had largely been expected to portray beauty. De Chirico replaced beauty with curiosity. Magritte had finally found what he had been searching for. Painting no longer had to represent only what could be seen. It could also give form to thought itself. From that moment on, everything changed. Impressionism, symbolism, cubism. They were all left behind. A new path had opened before him. Surrealism. To Magritte, every painting was a riddle, and the artist should never reveal its solution. Instead, he believed art should create new questions. That is why his paintings rarely offer explanations, because explanation was never his goal. He wanted to create a crack in the viewer's perception. He painted a pipe, then wrote beneath it, "This is not a pipe." And he was absolutely right, because what we see on the canvas is not a real pipe. It is only the representation of one. This is where Magritte's art meets philosophy. Words, images, objects, reality. None of them are truly the same. We simply agree to treat them as if they were. This revolutionary idea would eventually influence far more than painting. Graphic design, photography, advertising, cinema, and the entire language of modern visual communication. But Magritte's greatest masterpieces had yet to appear. As the 1930s began, the ideas forming inside his mind would finally take shape on canvas. A man whose face is hidden behind a green apple. A sky where day and night exist at the same time. Gigantic rocks floating through the clouds. And the sentence that continues to challenge millions of people to this day. This is not a pipe. 1929. Paris had given Magritte a great deal artistically, but personally, he had never found the peace he was searching for. As time passed, disagreements began to emerge between him and André Breton, the leader of the Surrealist movement. Breton believed Surrealism should be more than an artistic movement. To him, it was also a political and social revolution. Magritte disagreed. He had no desire to place art in the service of ideology. What fascinated him was not politics, but the way the human mind worked. As their differences grew, Magritte and Georgette decided to leave Paris and return to Brussels. From the outside, their life seemed remarkably ordinary. A modest house, a quiet neighborhood. Every morning, a man dressed neatly in a dark suit placed a bowler hat on his head and walked to his studio. His neighbors could hardly have imagined that he was one of the most extraordinary painters of the 20th century. Yet it was precisely this ordinary life that became the greatest source of inspiration for his art, because Magritte believed that mystery did not exist in distant places. It existed, hidden within everyday life. By the 1930s, Magritte had fully developed his own visual language. He no longer painted elaborate stories. Instead, a single image was enough to shake the viewer's entire way of thinking. A green apple hiding a man's face. Enormous rocks suspended in the sky. Clouds drifting through ordinary rooms. A man standing before a mirror, that reflects only the back of his head. A daytime sky floating above a street wrapped in the darkness of night. At first glance, these images appear impossible. But Magritte was never interested in painting the supernatural. He simply arranged reality in ways we were not accustomed to seeing. The human mind instinctively tries to make sense of familiar objects. Magritte disrupted that instinct. An apple was no longer just an apple. A window was no longer merely a window. A bowler hat was no longer simply a hat. Every object became the beginning of another question. 1939. Europe was once again consumed by war. Belgium was occupied. Life became uncertain all over again. People who had barely recovered from the First World War were now forced to confront another. Magritte was deeply affected by the darkness surrounding him. Yet he made a surprising decision. Rather than painting despair, he chose to paint hope. The colours in his work became noticeably brighter, warmer tones, gentler brushstrokes, more luminous landscapes. Art critics would later describe this phase as his Renoir period. The paintings echoed the cheerful atmosphere associated with Pierre-Auguste Renoir, embracing light instead of mystery. But audiences were confused. They wanted the Magritte they already knew. The quiet, the enigmatic, the thought-provoking Magritte. As a result, this period never received the recognition he had hoped for. Magritte was not finished surprising the art world. In 1948, he shocked critics once again. This time, he produced paintings that appeared deliberately crude. The figures were distorted. The colours were loud and exaggerated. The compositions resembled childlike drawings. This brief phase became known as the Vacher period. Although the French word vache literally means cow, in this context it suggested something deliberately coarse, irreverent, and provocative. Magritte was not trying to paint badly. He was mocking the expectations of the art establishment. People wanted him to keep repeating the same successful style. He refused. By doing the exact opposite, he demonstrated that art should never become trapped inside its own conventions. Even so, this experimental period lasted only a short time. Soon afterward, Magritte returned to the clear, deceptively simple visual language that had become uniquely his own. And that return marked the beginning of his international recognition. During the 1950s, Magritte's reputation spread far beyond Europe. His exhibitions attracted growing audiences. Critics increasingly viewed his work not merely as part of Surrealism, but as a major contribution to 20th century thought itself. His exhibitions in the United States received particular acclaim. Soon, it was not only painters who admired his work. Advertising agencies, graphic designers, photographers, film directors, all began drawing inspiration from his ideas. Today, whenever we encounter an advertisement that combines familiar objects in unexpected ways, a movie poster filled with visual mystery, or any image that challenges our sense of reality, we are almost certainly seeing echoes of Magritte's imagination. His legacy never remained confined to museums. It became part of popular culture itself. People constantly asked Magritte what his paintings meant. Yet he almost never gave a definitive answer, because in his view, art was never meant to explain. Its purpose was to create mystery. In one interview, he expressed an idea that perfectly captured his philosophy. Everything we see hides another thing. The human mind constantly tries to lift the curtain, but behind every curtain, there is another one waiting. That endless curiosity lies at the very heart of Magritte's art. That is why his paintings never offer final answers, only questions. And perhaps that is why, decades after they were created, they continue to captivate us with exactly the same power. By the 1960s, René Magritte was widely recognized as one of the greatest living painters of his generation. He had spent decades working quietly. He never chased artistic trends. He never abandoned his own path. Fame did not change him. He continued living in the same modest home in Brussels. Each morning, he dressed in his familiar suit, put on his bowler hat, and entered his studio to create yet another visual riddle. But his health gradually began to decline. In 1967, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. After months of treatment, René Magritte passed away on August 15, 1967, at the age of 68. He left behind hundreds of paintings. But what he truly left the world was far greater than a body of work. He left behind an entirely new way of seeing. Magritte did not teach us how to paint. He taught us how to look. He reminded us that the ordinary objects we pass every day may not be ordinary at all. And even today, millions of people standing before his paintings continue to ask themselves the very same question. How real is the reality we believe we see? Magritte's masterpieces. The Treachery of Images. This is not a pipe. 1929. Perhaps the most debated painting in the history of modern art. At first glance, it seems remarkably simple. A perfectly painted pipe sits at the center of the canvas. Beneath it is a single sentence. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. At first, the statement appears absurd. Your eyes clearly see a pipe. But this is exactly where Magritte's idea begins. No. What you see is not a real pipe. You cannot fill it with tobacco. You cannot light it. You cannot smoke it. It is merely the image of a pipe. With this single painting, Magritte questioned the relationship between words, images, and reality itself. The name of an object is not the object. A picture can never replace reality. Today, in the digital age, this idea feels more relevant than ever. Much of what we see online is nothing more than a representation of reality. Magritte understood that nearly a century ago. The lovers. Imagine two people. They embrace. They kiss. Yet both of their faces are completely covered by white cloth. They are physically close, but unable to truly see one another. This is The Lovers, one of Magritte's most emotional paintings. Over the decades, countless interpretations have been offered. Some believe it represents the impossibility of ever fully knowing another person. Others connect it to the death of Magritte's mother and the story that her face was covered when her body was recovered from the river. Magritte himself never confirmed that interpretation. Perhaps it had nothing to do with his mother. Or perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved forever. That uncertainty is precisely what makes his work so compelling. The false mirror. A giant human eye. But instead of a pupil, there is an endless blue sky filled with white clouds. Are we looking at the world? Or is the world looking back at us? That is the question posed by the false mirror. The eye is not merely an organ of sight. It is the way our minds interpret reality. Perhaps none of us truly sees the world as it is. Perhaps we see only the version our minds create. Golconda men dressed in dark overcoats and bowler hats fill the sky. Are they falling, or are they floating? The painting never tells us. At first, the scene appears orderly, but the longer we look, the more unsettling it becomes. Every figure seems almost identical. Individual identity begins to disappear. Today, Golconda is often interpreted as a powerful reflection on modern urban life. Crowds of people becoming increasingly alike, while individuality quietly fades away. not to be reproduced. A man stands before a mirror. Naturally, we expect to see his face. Instead, the mirror reflects the back of his head. Only the book resting on the table appears correctly reflected. This is one of Magritte's favorite methods. He does not destroy logic. He simply bends it. The mirror, an object we trust to reveal reality, quietly betrays us. The painting asks an unsettling question. Do we ever truly see ourselves? Or only the version we believe ourselves to be? The human condition. Imagine looking through a window. In front of it stands an easel. On the easel is a painting. The painted landscape aligned so perfectly with the real landscape beyond the window that the boundary between image and reality disappears completely. Perhaps no painting summarizes Magritte's philosophy better than the human condition. Do we truly see the world? Or are we always looking at a picture our own minds have created? Time transfixed. A steam locomotive bursts out of a fireplace. There are no railway tracks, no station, the empire of light. Perhaps Magritte's most poetic masterpiece. Below, it is night. Street lamps glow softly. The houses lie in darkness. But above, the sky is bright blue, filled with the light of day, night and day, existing together, at the same moment, in the same place. Impossible in reality. Perfectly possible in Magritte's universe. Because in his paintings, it is not the laws of physics that rule, but the laws of thought, the Son of Man. And finally, perhaps the most recognizable face in modern art. Ironically, it is a face we never truly see. A man stands wearing a dark suit and a bowler hat. A bright green apple floats directly in front of his face. Naturally, we want to see what is hidden, but Magritte refuses. Deliberately, he believed that human curiosity is always drawn toward what remains concealed. Yet some mysteries should remain mysteries forever. That is why the Son of Man is far more than a portrait. It is a portrait of curiosity itself. Even today, its influence can be found everywhere. In advertising, fashion photography, album covers, cinema, and countless works of contemporary visual culture. Magritte's legacy. René Magritte passed away in 1967, but his ideas never did. Today, echoes of his imagination can be found in the films of Christopher Nolan, the dreamlike worlds of David Lynch, advertising campaigns, fashion photography, graphic design, cinema, photography, and even the images that fill our social media feeds. Because Magritte did not simply change painting, he changed the way we look at images. He taught us that a window is never just a window, an apple is never just an apple, and a pipe was never simply a pipe. Perhaps that is why his paintings remain as powerful today as they were nearly a century ago. Technology changes. Art movements come and go. The world constantly transforms, but the human mind continues searching for the same questions. What is reality? How much can we trust what we see? And perhaps the most important question of all, is a painting ever just a painting? René Magritte's life reminds us that art is not merely about creating beautiful images. Sometimes, a single painting can say more than hundreds of pages. Sometimes, one simple sentence can completely transform the way we understand reality. And sometimes, as we find ourselves staring at a pipe, we may actually be looking at ourselves.